Her tent collapsed at 11 at night in the middle of a thunderstorm, and the first thing she did, before checking her camera, before finding a flashlight, was walk straight to mine. I heard her before I saw her. Footsteps in the mud, fast, and then her voice outside the rainfly, pitched just loud enough to carry over the storm. "Daniel!" I unzipped the flap. Maya Bennett was standing there, soaked through, her camera bag clutched against her chest like a person evacuating a fire with the one thing that mattered. Her hair flattened to her face, looking at me with an expression caught somewhere between irritation and the specific helplessness of someone whose shelter has just failed them in the worst possible weather. "My tent collapsed," she said, stating the obvious, the way you do when you're too cold to manage anything more elegant. I heard the pole snap from here. "It wasn't the pole, it was the whole—" She gestured behind her at the wreckage, invisible in the dark and the rain, but I'd seen enough collapsed tents in 12 years of guiding to know exactly what kind of disaster she was describing. It just folded, like it gave up. Lightning cracked somewhere over the ridge. She flinched, then looked at me with the expression of someone doing math she didn't want to be doing. "Yours has room for 2, right?" she said. I checked. "You bought the bigger one in March." I had, in fact, bought the bigger one in March. I had also not examined too closely why I'd bought the bigger one when I camped alone most of the time, which is the kind of self-deception a person can maintain indefinitely if nobody asks them to look at it directly. "Get in," I said. She got in. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 33 years old. I guide mountain trips for a living, 3-day treks, technical climbs, the occasional corporate retreat where I spend more time managing anxiety than altitude. I've been doing it for 12 years. I am good at reading weather, reading terrain, reading the specific moment when a group of strangers stops being strangers and starts being a team that trusts each other on a rock face. I am less good at reading the thing that had been sitting right across the landing for 3 years. Maya Bennett moved into 4C the same month I moved into 4D. We shared a landing, a thin wall, and, eventually, the way these things accumulate, a friendship built out of small repeated contact. She was a nature photographer, freelance, the kind whose work occasionally ran in magazines I didn't read, but whose income mostly came from corporate clients who wanted moody shots of mountains for their websites. She carried a camera bag the way some people carry a purse, always, everywhere, including, apparently, into a collapsing tent during a thunderstorm. The friendship had started with a small inconvenience. My 3rd week in 4D, the building's water heater failed for 2 days, and Maya appeared at my door with a kettle and an offer of hot water, since she'd noticed I hadn't figured out the workaround everyone else already knew about. I made terrible instant coffee. We talked on the landing for 40 minutes about nothing important. That was the beginning of a routine neither of us ever called a routine. Sunday coffee on the landing if we were both home. Borrowed gear when one of us needed something the other had. The annual group camping trip with 6 or 7 neighbors from the building, organized by a guy named Jake from 2A, who took the role of social coordinator with the seriousness of an elected office. This was the 4th year of the trip. The first year, separate sides of camp. The second, close enough that Maya would call something through the canvas before sleep. A comment about the stars. A complaint about Jake's snoring. The 3rd year, we'd pitch directly next to each other without discussing it, the way 2 people drift toward proximity when neither wants to be the one to suggest it outright. I remembered lying awake that 3rd year, listening to her settle into her own tent, and thinking the 6 feet between us felt like nothing and everything at once. I had not examined that thought closely. Examining it would have required doing something about it. We had never shared a tent. We were sharing one now, and the inside of my tent was dry, which felt like an achievement given the circumstances, and lit only by the small lantern I kept clipped to the ceiling loop. Maya knelt just inside the flap, dripping, and looked around at the space. My sleeping bag, my pack, the general organized chaos of a guide who had spent 12 years learning exactly what gear mattered and what didn't. "You're going to get my stuff wet," I said, nodding at her camera bag. "My camera is fine. I wrapped it before I came over." She set the bag down carefully, away from the door, in the dry corner. Then she looked at herself, soaked through, shivering slightly, the particular cold of someone who has been standing in mountain rain for 10 minutes, deciding whether asking for help was worth the awkwardness. "You're freezing," I said. "I'm fine." "Maya." "I'm fine, Daniel." I knew the specific tone she used when she was being stubborn about something that didn't need stubbornness. The tone that meant she'd decided independence was easier than admitting a need. I'd watched her use it about directions, about gear, about the time she'd sprained her ankle and insisted on walking the last 2 miles rather than let anyone carry her pack. I reached into my pack and pulled out my spare jacket, the heavy one, the kind built for actual mountain cold rather than the relatively mild thunderstorm we were currently experiencing at 6,000 feet. "Put this on," I said. "Not because you need rescuing, because you're going to ruin my sleeping bag with the wet clothes otherwise, and I only brought one." She looked at the jacket, then at me. Something in her expression shifted, not quite gratitude, more like the recognition of being given an exit that let her accept help, without it costing her the independence she was protecting. That's a generous framing," she said. "I'm a generous person." She took the jacket. She turned slightly away to change out of her wet outer layer. Practical, not modest exactly, just efficient, the way she did most things. And when she turned back, she was wearing my jacket, 3 sizes too big, sleeves rolled twice, and she looked, despite the absurdity of the fit, like something I was going to remember for a long time. "Better?" I asked. Better." She sat down, cross-legged, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. "Thank you. You're welcome." We sat there for a moment listening to the rain on the rainfly, heavy, then heavier, the specific percussion of a real mountain storm. "This is going to last a while," I said. "I know mountain weather, Daniel. I've been photographing it for 8 years. Just confirming we're on the same page about being stuck here." She looked at me. The corner of her mouth moved. "We're on the same page," she said. And we talked for the first hour because talking was easier than the alternative, which was sitting in a small tent during a thunderstorm, acknowledging the specific quality of proximity that neither of us had previously had to acknowledge. "This is strange," Maya said, about 20 minutes in. "What's strange?" "This. Sitting here. 3 years of Sunday coffee on a landing, and now we're in a tent together, and it doesn't feel—" She paused, searching for the word. "It doesn't feel as strange as it should. Should it feel strange?" "We've never been alone together for this long. Not really. Coffee on the landing is 20 minutes. This is—" She gestured at the storm outside, the obvious indefinite length of the situation. "This is different." "Is he different bad?" She considered this with the same care she gave to a difficult photograph, turning it over, checking the angles. "No," she said finally. "Different isn't bad. Different is just different." I handed her the small bag of trail mix I kept for emergencies, which this technically qualified as. She took a handful without comment, which I'd learned meant she was comfortable enough not to perform gratitude over small things. "Tell me about the shot," I said. "The lightning one." She told me about the shot she'd been trying to get before her tent collapsed. Lightning over the ridge, the kind of image that required either tremendous patience or tremendous luck, and she'd been getting neither for 3 nights running. "You were outside in a thunderstorm," I said, "trying to photograph the thunderstorm. That's generally how lightning photography works. It seems like the kind of work that gets people killed." "I'm careful." She pulled the jacket sleeve back to check her watch, a habit I'd noticed before. She tracked time the way other people checked their phones, compulsively, like she needed to know exactly how much daylight or storm or opportunity she had left. Mostly careful. Mostly, I got struck by static once, not lightning. Static electricity from a metal tripod leg in low humidity. She said this like it was a minor inconvenience rather than evidence supporting my point. It was educational. That's one word for it. What would you call it? Alarming, from someone who cares whether you're alive. The words came out before I'd fully considered them, and I heard the specific weight in them, not the casual concern of a neighbor, something with more substance underneath it. Maya went still for a moment. That's a strange thing to say, she said carefully. Is it inaccurate? She looked at me. The lantern light did something to her face that I was going to think about later, the kind of attention you pay to detail you're not supposed to be paying attention to. No, she said. It's not inaccurate. We sat with that for a moment. The rain kept its rhythm. Somewhere down the hill, in another tent, someone laughed at something. Jake, probably, oblivious to the specific shift happening in 4D's spare tent. Daniel, Maya said. Yeah. Why did you buy the bigger tent in March? I had been waiting a long time for someone to ask me a version of that question, and I had never expected it to be asked during a thunderstorm by the person it was actually about. I told myself it was for gear storage, I said. More room for equipment on longer trips. And the real reason? I looked at her. At the jacket 3 sizes too big. At the camera bag in the dry corner. At an annual trip we'd never once shared a tent on until tonight. I don't know, I said. I think I just liked the idea of having room for someone else, even if I never used it. Maya was quiet. And that's either very honest or very strategic, she said. I'm a mountain guide. I don't have the bandwidth for strategic. She almost laughed, the almost laugh she did when something landed and she wasn't ready to fully commit to finding it funny. I should probably check on my tent in the morning, she said. See what's salvageable. Probably. Tonight, though. She looked at the small space between us, in a 2-person tent during a storm that wasn't ending soon. Tonight I'm here. Tonight you're here, I agreed. We sat in a silence that had shifted from the awkward kind to something more comfortable, and after a while Maya pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, settling into the corner of the tent with the specific economy of someone who had spent a lot of nights in small spaces and knew how to make herself comfortable in them. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah. Why mountain guiding? You could do something that pays better, something with weekends. I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because most of what people need isn't complicated. They need someone steady when the terrain gets difficult, someone who's already been scared on this exact trail and knows it's survivable. I looked at the tent ceiling. I like being that person, even when it doesn't pay great. That's a generous way to describe a job. You asked for the honest version. She was quiet for a moment. I think that's why I always feel safe asking you for help, even when I don't want to need it. You don't need to feel bad about needing help, Maya. I know, She looked at her hands. My dad left when I was 12. My mom did everything herself after that, and she made it look easy, and I think I absorbed the lesson that needing things from people was a kind of weakness. She glanced at me. I'm working on it. You walked straight to my tent tonight, before checking your camera. I know. She looked almost surprised by this fact, like she was reconsidering it in real time. I didn't even think about it. I just came here. That's not weakness, I said. That's instinct. Your body knew something before your brain caught up to it. She looked at me for a long moment, the lantern light catching something in her expression that I filed away to think about later. That's a very therapeutic thing for a mountain guide to say. I spend a lot of time talking people down from panic on rock faces. You learn things. She almost laughed, the same almost laugh from before, like she was keeping something in reserve. And we slept eventually, or something close to sleep. the specific half-rest of two people sharing a space too small to ignore each other and too dark to pretend they weren't aware of every small movement the other made. I woke twice in the night to the sound of the storm easing, and both times I was aware of her breathing on the other side of the tent, steady and close. In the morning, the rain had stopped. The camp emerged slowly, the way camps do after a hard night, people checking gear, assessing damage, the particular communal relief of survivors comparing notes. Maya's tent was, as predicted, not salvageable. The center pole had snapped clean and torn the rainfly in the process. She stood over the wreckage in the morning light, my jacket still on her, surveying the damage with the expression of someone calculating logistics rather than mourning equipment. That's done, she said. I have a spare tent in my truck, I said. You can use it for the rest of the trip. You have a spare tent. I guide for a living. I have several spare everythings. She looked at me. Or you could just share yours again. It was said lightly, the kind of statement designed to be easily walked back if it landed wrong. But I'd spent 12 years reading subtle shifts in terrain and weather and group dynamics, and I recognized this one for what it was, an offer disguised as logistics. I could do that, I said. Just for the rest of the trip, she said. Practical reasons. Practical reasons, I agreed. Sarah from 3B had already started a quiet conversation with two of the other neighbors about 30 feet away, the kind of conversation that involves a lot of glancing in your direction and pretending not to. I noticed it. Maya noticed it too, judging by the slight flush that crept up from her collar. We were still standing there, close again, when Jake from 2A walked over with the specific energy of a man who organizes group trips and considers interpersonal dynamics part of his unofficial portfolio. So, Jake said, looking between us. Maya in Daniel's jacket. Daniel's tent, clearly slept in by two people based on the general state of the rainfly zippers. What's going on with you two? The camp went quiet in the way camps do. When someone asks the question everyone has been wondering, and nobody has been brave enough to voice. Maya looked at me. I looked at Maya. Her tent collapsed, I said. She used mine. Right, Jake said. And the jacket? She was cold. And the fact that you've been neighbors this whole time and never shared a tent until last night. And now you're both standing here at 7 in the morning, looking like you didn't sleep great for reasons that aren't just the storm. The rest of the camp had stopped pretending not to listen. Jake, Maya said. I'm just asking the question everyone's thinking, Jake said, entirely unrepentant. 3 years, you two, Sunday coffee, borrowed gear. You came on this trip together every single year and pitched separate tents every single year, like that was a reasonable thing to keep doing. He looked between us. So, what's going on? I looked at Maya. She looked at me. The camp waited. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'd like to find out. Maya's expression did something complicated. Surprise, then something warmer underneath it. The specific unguarding of a person who has been protecting something carefully for a long time and has just had it named by someone else, in public, with no easy way to deflect. That's a very direct answer, she said. You asked me a direct question. Jake asked. I'm answering. I notice you didn't deny it. I didn't. Jake, satisfied, clapped his hands together. Great, pancakes are ready. This has been very productive. He walked back toward the camp stove, entirely pleased with himself, already announcing to the rest of the group that the situation had been addressed, as if he'd resolved a logistics problem rather than detonated years of careful avoidance in front of everyone we knew. Sarah from 3B caught my eye as she walked past with her plate, gave me a small, knowing smile, and said nothing, which was somehow louder than if she had said something. Maya let out a breath. That was mortifying. And that was Jake. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She rubbed her face with both hands. I cannot believe he just asked that, in front of everyone, At 7 in the morning. You handled it. I didn't handle anything. You're the one who said, I don't know, but I'd like to find out, like it was nothing. She looked at me, something between exasperation and astonishment. Do you understand what you just did? You just told 7 people in public that you have feelings you haven't sorted out yet, about me. I'm aware of what I did. Were you planning that? No, I admitted. Jake asked a direct question. I gave a direct answer. I didn't have time to plan anything. She stared at me for a moment, then something in her face cracked open into a laugh. Not the almost laugh, the real thing, startled out of her by the sheer absurdity of the morning. We're going to have to actually talk about this now, she said. Properly. Not just hypothetically, not just in front of an audience because Jake forced the issue. I'd like that, I said, talking about it properly. Today? On the trail. Not right now, because I need coffee and a minute to process being interrogated before 9 in the morning. Today on the trail? I agreed. She looked toward the camp stove, where Jake was already serving pancakes with the satisfied air of a man who believed he'd just done a great service to the building's social fabric. I'm going to need a minute before I can look at him without laughing or strangling him, she said. Take your minute. I'll get you coffee. She nodded, and I left her standing in the wreckage of her old tent, walking toward the camp stove to get 2 cups of coffee, while behind me I could hear Jake recounting the entire exchange to anyone who hadn't witnessed it firsthand, with the enthusiasm of a man narrating a particularly satisfying sports victory. After the pancakes and Jake's commentary, the rest of camp slowly dispersed to pack up for the day's hike, leaving Maya and me to deal with the wreckage of her tent in something closer to privacy. She knelt by the broken pole, examining the break with the practical focus of someone who'd spent years troubleshooting equipment failures in the field. This is a clean snap, not user error, just bad luck and an old tent. You've had that tent for a while. 6 years, it's been through a lot. She looked at it with something like fondness despite the destruction. I should probably replace it before next year. Or, I said, you could just use mine going forward. She looked up at me. You keep offering that. I keep meaning it. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked at me with an expression that was working through something. Daniel, if I say yes to that, and I'm not saying I am, I'm asking hypothetically, what exactly am I saying yes to? I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I'd like to find out, the same way I told Jake. She looked at the broken tent one more time, then back at me. Hypothetically, she said, I think I'd say yes. We packed the broken tent into my truck alongside the rest of my gear, and by the time we joined the group for the day's hike, something between us had shifted into a new register. Not fully named yet, but no longer entirely unspoken either. We spent the rest of the day on the trail Jake had planned. 6 miles, moderate elevation, the kind of hike that gave you plenty of time to think and plenty of terrain that required you not to think too hard while you were doing it. Maya photographed everything. This was normal. She always did. Every trip, documenting the trail with the specific patience of someone who understood that good light came and went on its own schedule, and you had to be ready for it. What was different was that she kept circling back to where I was, falling into step beside me on the sections where the trail widened enough for 2. You're hovering, I said, around mile 3. I'm not hovering. I'm taking pictures. You took a picture of a rock that looked exactly like the rock you photographed 10 minutes ago. Different light. Maya, she lowered the camera, looked at me directly. Fine, I'm hovering. Why? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same care she gave to composing a shot. Because Jake asked a question this morning, and I've been thinking about my answer for 6 miles, and I haven't said it yet. What's your answer? She looked at the trail ahead, at the ridge line where clouds were building again. Not storm clouds yet, just the particular drama of mountain weather, deciding what kind of afternoon it wanted to be. "I've liked you for 3 years," she said. "Not the easy kind of liking. The kind where I told myself it was simpler to not say anything because if I said it and you didn't feel the same, I'd lose the Sunday coffee and the borrowed gear and the person who knows exactly which trail. I mean when I say the overlook without me having to specify." She looked at me. I decided the friendship was worth more than the risk. For 3 years, I stopped walking. She stopped too. "And last night?" I said. "Last night my tent collapsed and I walked straight to yours without thinking about it, which probably tells you something I hadn't fully admitted to myself." She held my gaze. "I didn't go to Jake's tent, or Sarah's. I went to yours, instinctively, before I'd decided anything. I thought about the bigger tent I'd bought in March, about every annual trip where I'd watched her pitch a separate tent, while some part of me wondered what would happen if she didn't. I bought the bigger tent because some part of me has been hoping for exactly what happened last night," I said. "Not the storm, the rest of it, the part where you ended up there." Maya looked at me for a long moment. The clouds kept building over the ridge, deciding their afternoon. "That's 3 years we both wasted," she said. "We didn't waste it. We built something real first. The rest is just—" I considered the word. "Additional. Additional," she repeated, the almost laugh again, closer to a real one this time. "That's a very practical way to describe falling for someone. I'm a practical person. Mostly." "Mostly," she said, echoing my own word back at me from the night before. We started walking again. The space between us on the trail had changed. Not dramatically, just enough that our shoulders brushed twice in the next quarter mile where the trail narrowed, and neither of us moved away from the second time. Around mile 5, we stopped at an overlook the rest of the group had already passed through, the kind of viewpoint that required a short detour off the main trail and wasn't worth the time to most people, but was exactly the kind of thing Maya couldn't pass up. She set up her camera while I sat on a flat rock and watched her work. The careful adjustments, the patience for light, the specific stillness she fell into when she was waiting for a shot to arrive rather than chasing it. "This is the overlook," she said, without looking up from the viewfinder. "The one I mean when I just say the overlook, and you always know which one." "I remember. You've never asked me why this one. Out of all the views on this mountain. I figured you'd tell me eventually." She took the shot. 3 frames, quick succession, then lowered the camera and looked at the valley below, the haze settling into the lower elevations the way it did in late afternoon. "This was the first place I ever photographed after I moved here," she said. 3 years ago, before I really knew anyone in the building. I came up here alone and took this exact shot, and I remember thinking, I could build a life around moments like this, just me and the camera and the mountain." She glanced at me. "I didn't expect the moments to start including other people. Is that a complaint?" "No." She sat down beside me on the rock, closer than she would have a week ago. "It's an observation. I came up here for solitude and ended up building something else entirely. I'm not upset about the trade. I looked at the same valley she'd been photographing. I used to guide solo trips almost exclusively. Less coordination, less liability, more control. Somewhere along the way, I started taking more group trips. Well, why? Because I noticed I liked watching people figure things out together, the moment when a group stops being strangers. I glanced at her. I think I liked it because it reminded me of what was happening on our landing, except I hadn't put a name to that yet either. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the haze settling over the valley. "We're both very good at not naming things," she said. "We're working on it." "We are," she agreed. "As of this morning, thanks to Jake." "Thanks to Jake," I echoed, and we both laughed. Easy, unguarded. The kind of laugh that comes when something that's been heavy gets to be light for a moment. We sat there a while longer before catching up to the rest of the group, neither of us in a hurry, the overlook holding both of us the way it had held just her before. The storm that had been building over the ridge caught up to us with about 2 miles left on the trail. Not as severe as the previous night, but enough to send the group into a scramble for rain gear and a faster pace toward camp. Maya and I ended up walking together at the back, slightly behind the others, in the specific rain that's heavy enough to be uncomfortable, but light enough not to be dangerous. "We should hurry," she said. "We should." Neither of us hurried. She had her camera wrapped and secured, which meant her hands were free. And at some point on the last stretch of trail, in the rain, she reached over and took my hand. Not dramatically, just reached over and took it, the way you take hold of something you've decided you're allowed to have. I held on. We walked the last half mile like that, soaked, slower than the group ahead of us, neither of us in any particular hurry to arrive. That night, my tent again, not because hers needed replacing this time, but because neither of us suggested otherwise, and the alternative would have required a conversation about why we wanted separate tents, now that everyone knew there was a reason not to. She set her camera bag in the dry corner, same as the night before. She changed into dry clothes, same as the night before. But this time, when she settled into the sleeping bag beside mine, there was no careful distance left between them. "Jake's going to be insufferable about this," she said, into the dark. Jake was already insufferable about it this morning. "He's going to organize a toast at the next building meeting." Almost certainly, she was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad my tent collapsed." That's a strange thing to be glad about." "I know." I felt her shift slightly, closer, but I don't think I would have said anything, not without something forcing the question. Her voice was quiet, the specific quiet of someone admitting something true in the dark, where it's easier. I would have kept pitching a separate tent every year for the rest of my life and called it caution. I would have kept buying tents with extra room and never explained why. "We're both ridiculous. Incompatible ways." She laughed, the real one this time. No almost about it. Quiet in the dark of the tent, but full and genuine. Then the laugh faded, and she went quiet for a while. And when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its ease. "Daniel, yeah, what if this only feels real because of the storm?" She said it carefully, like she'd been turning it over before deciding to say it out loud. "Tents and lightning, and Jake putting us on the spot in front of everyone. What if it's just the situation, and in a week, back in the building, sky clear, nothing forcing anything? What if it doesn't feel like this anymore?" I thought about it for a moment, because it deserved a real answer, not just reassurance. "Then ask me again when the sky is clear," I said. She was quiet. "That's not really an answer," she said. "It's the only honest one I have. I can't prove tonight what next Tuesday is going to feel like. Nobody can do that." I found her hand in the dark. "But I'm not asking you to trust the storm. I'm asking you to ask me again once it's passed. If I'm still here, and I will be, that's your answer." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she laced her fingers through mine, the same certainty as the trail. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll ask you again. I'll be waiting for the question." "Daniel." "Yeah." "Ask me the question again. The one from last night." I understood what she meant. I turned slightly toward her in the dark. "My tent has room for 2, I said. "Not because yours collapsed, because I'd like you here, every time, storm or no storm." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over in the dark and found my hand again, the same way she had on the trail, certain this time instead of tentative. "Then I accept," she said. "Officially, for all future trips, storm's optional." We got back to the building on Sunday evening, exhausted and sunburned and carrying gear that needed a week of drying out. Jake organized a group dinner, which mostly consisted of him telling everyone within earshot that he had personally orchestrated the most important relationship development of the year through pure investigative journalism, a claim nobody bothered to dispute because arguing with Jake about his own legend was never worth the effort. Maya's apartment, 4C, sat across the landing from mine, 4D, same as always. That Tuesday, our Sunday ritual, moved a couple days late because the weekend had gone to recovering. She opened the door already holding 2 mugs. "I made coffee," she said. "I figured you'd come by." "I always come by." "I know. I just like saying it." We sat on the landing the way we always had, except this time her shoulder rested against mine instead of maintaining the careful 3-year distance. And on the wall, just inside her open door, I noticed a new photograph, printed and framed, hung in the place where her best work usually went. It wasn't a mountain, it wasn't lightning over a ridge. It was the inside of a tent, taken in low lantern light, slightly grainy from the available light. My hands, mid-gesture, telling some story she'd captured without my noticing. The kind of photograph you take of something you've decided matters enough to keep looking at. "When did you take that?" I asked. "The first night, while you were talking about static electricity victims." She looked at the photo. I told myself it was just a good composition study. "And the real reason?" She looked at me, the look I'd been learning to read all week, the one underneath the practical surface. "I wanted something to look at," she said, in case I never worked up the courage to say anything. I looked at the photograph, at Sunday coffee that had become Tuesday coffee, and an annual trip that was never going to involve separate tents again. "You won't need the photograph for that anymore," I said. "No," she said, "but I'm keeping it anyway." "Why?" She smiled, the full one, easy now, the kind that had taken a long time and one collapsed tent to fully arrive. "Because some things are worth documenting," she said, "even after they stop being just a memory." We sat on the landing for a while longer, coffee going lukewarm in our hands, and I thought about the math of it. Years of careful distance, 6 feet between 2 tents that felt like nothing and everything, undone by one storm in about 90 seconds. "Jake's already planning next year's trip," Maya said. "He mentioned it at dinner, said he wants to go somewhere with worse weather next time." That's either a joke or a threat. With Jake, hard to tell. She leaned her head against my shoulder, easy now, like she'd been doing it for years instead of days. "Either way, I already know what tent I'm using." "The bigger one." "The bigger one." She looked up at me. "Room for 2, like you planned." "I told you. I didn't plan it. I just bought a bigger tent and didn't ask myself why." "Sure," she said, in the tone of someone who didn't believe that for a second and wasn't going to push the point because the outcome had worked out fine regardless. The building was quiet around us, the particular quiet of a Tuesday evening with everyone settling back into routine after a weekend away. Somewhere below, Jake's voice carried up through an open window, already recruiting people for the next adventure, with the relentless enthusiasm of a man who considered group activities a personal calling. For what it's worth," I said. "I'm glad he asked the question that morning. I don't think either of us would have said anything otherwise." "I know." Maya set her coffee down on the step beside her. "Years of careful distance, undone by one nosy neighbor and a bad tent pole. That's either romantic or deeply unromantic. I can't decide which." "Both," she said. "I think it's both." She reached over and laced her fingers through mine. The same unhurried certainty as the trail, as the second night in the tent, as every small gesture that had accumulated since the storm first knocked her shelter down and sent her walking, without thinking, straight to mine. "Sunday coffee," I said. "Or I guess now it's Tuesday coffee." "Tuesday works," she said. "Tuesday works fine." Nah. What would you have done if a storm took away your shelter, and the first place you walked to, without thinking, was someone you'd been too careful around for years? Have you ever needed something to force a question you'd been too afraid to ask yourself? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.